So a personal experience like this must have changed your opinion about the afterlife.
One thing that for many people over the years has been very difficult to grasp, I guess, is that even though I had interviewed thousands of people with near-death experiences, and certainly am fascinated by this, that I just didn't know whether there's a life after death or not. It's people kind of expect me to say, oh, yes, there is, because they're looking for that comfort or whatever, but I couldn't face it that way. I mean, as a logician, I just realized there's major difficulties in trying to give rational credence to the notion of an afterlife. So I just didn't know. But about 2 years ago, I had an experience that really brought me to the point where I had to just sort of go on and say, well, yeah, apparently there is life after death. And there are other cases like this, but I will use an illustrative one to illustrate the problem. Say about 2 years ago, I met this really interesting guy who's an artist who had a near-death experience when he was in a horrific car crash and he lost one leg and his wife was killed instantly in the accident. But he was so moved and changed by this near-death experience he had that he started writing it up, which I encouraged him to do. My thinking being that artists process things by that kind of activity, so I thought it would be a good thing for him. So about 2 years ago, he sent me his finished book, which was really good. Then, less than 2 weeks later, he called me back and said that in reading through his own book, he had mentioned the name of the trauma surgeon who saved his life. So he thought, well, this is kind of impolite. So he contacted the trauma surgeon and invited him to lunch. And when the doctor came, he related to him the near-death experience he had had, whereupon the doctors said, after becoming very solemn, said, yeah, well, when you were in the operating room, I was in contact with your wife, that he felt the presence of the wife. And then as this came forward, then the nurse spoke up who was involved and reported the same kind of experience. So at that point in my thinking and trying to put this case together and to come up with some other scenario that doesn't involve the notion of an afterlife, I consciously felt myself trying to run away and rationalize and escape rather than just saying what seems to be straightforwardly the case. So this has brought me around to the opinion, or not so much as the opinion as the assessment, if I can put it that way. The assessment that there's life after death. Because any scenario I could think of to dispel that kind of case, where not just the patient but the physician and the other medical personnel around experience something simultaneously, it becomes just wildly implausible to me. For example, what do I say? That, yeah, the patient had this experience because of a physiologically compromised and maybe diminished oxygen flow to the brain, so he had this experience. But then what do we say about the doctor and the nurse? That they were having what? A joint psychotic episode? That's possible and conceivable, but I think the intellectually honest thing here to say is that it looks like there is life after death.